Hello, we're tackling another seemingly simple question today. What is the oldest house in London? Now, if you've seen my previous video about the oldest pub in London, you'll see that got fairly complicated and there's several answers. Whereas this time, I think, is a little more clear-cut. But as ever, there are some caveats, there are some pedantic what-about-isms. So if you like that kind of thing, you're in for a treat today. Now, if you're new, welcome. My name's Katie. I'm a Blue Badge tourist guide and the founder of Look Up London, which runs public weekend walks and private tours all across London, specialising in that hidden history that most Londoners don't know. I make a new YouTube video every other week and also release a weekly new blog post to my email list. So if you'd like to sign up for that and also to hear about upcoming walking tours, there's a link in the description where you can find out more and sign up there. In today's video, we're going to be talking about 8 old buildings across London, but it's quite helpful to have a criteria. So 3 things that I've used to choose these buildings and discern which is the oldest is 1, of course, when was it first built? 2, what is the age of most of the building? And 3, is it still used as a house today? So of these 8 top buildings, we're going to make our way from the youngest and to the oldest. And we're starting within the City of London. Beside Cannon Street Station, you'll find the lovely little alley of St Lawrence Pountney Hill. The name St Lawrence comes from a nearby church, and Pountney is a corruption of Sir John de Pulteney, who was a Lord Mayor and founded a college nearby. The church was destroyed in the Great Fire of London and never rebuilt, but the rectory house was in the 1670s. Today it's still a private home in the City of London and part of a thorough survey from the City of London Architecture Trust found that part of the outer walls was retained from the medieval wall from the 14th century. So it's still a house. It has some very old parts, medieval even, but I think we can do better than built in the 1670s. North of the city in Islington, we arrive at Newington Green, specifically numbers 52 to 55. We first get a mention of Newington Green as a little suburban enclave in the 1480s, and it was clearly popular because by 1658 a speculative property development had sprung up in this area. Now, although these homes have been altered and restored, they are still standing. Built in 1658, used as private homes today. You can see them on the John Rock map of 1746, and they're referred to as the oldest terrace houses in London. But what about houses from the 1500s? Here we get to the most common answer, especially if you're just doing a quick Google. This is the answer that will most readily come up. We're back in the City of London at 41 to 42 Cloth Fair by Smithfield. And there's even a book written about this one by Fiona Rule called The Oldest House in London. But really, if we're being pedantic, this should be the oldest house in the City of London, because there are some, as we'll see, older houses across Greater London. Now, just quickly, in case you're thoroughly confused, Greater London is the area that we refer to London today, whereas the City of London is the oldest part, founded around 2,000 years ago by the Romans as their city Londinium. So it's a little city within a much larger one. Now, these homes from Cloth Fair were built as a new development by Henry Rich from 1597 and finished 1614. Amazingly, they predate the Great Fire of London, which in 1666 destroyed 80% of the City of London. You can see that they're still standing on this map from 1669. Now, of course, they've been extensively restored, and Historic England describes them as early 17th century, but if we count when they started being built, they just squeeze into the 1500s, and they're still used as private homes today. But there's another house built in the early 1500s that is still standing. It's in Hackney. Fans of Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall might recognise this. It's Sutton House, built in the 1530s as the family home for Ralph Sadler, a courtier under King Henry VIII. Now, slight caveat in that it's no longer a house, but a museum run by the National Trust. And that's great because you can visit it today. It has plenty of original Tudor features, and weirdly enough, it was also squatted in the 1980s, which makes an odd juxtaposition upstairs. So far it is the oldest building built as a house in the 1530s, but is no longer used as such. So let's storm into the 1400s. Along a busy, fairly unpleasant road in Bromley by Bow, you'll find this amazing survivor. This is Bromley Hall, which, as you can see on the John Rock map, used to be surrounded by fields. Now, most of the house, to be fair, that we see from the outside today does date from the 1700s. However, in 2003, a renovation found carved doorways and timbers that date from 1485. So perhaps it doesn't quite count because it's only small parts that date from the 15th century, and I suppose it's discounted because it's used as office and commercial space rather than a house today. A far better contender is Walthamstow's Ancient House. I mean, the clue is kind of in the name. This gorgeous timber-framed hall house is estimated to have been built in 1435. A hall house is an early English architectural style, and it just means that the main part of the building is around one large room or a hall. Now, funnily enough, it's only fairly recently, in the 1930s, that we discovered how truly old it was. Until then, this house was clad in weatherboarding from the 1700s. You can see it in white on the left-hand side of the picture here. And it was only when that was removed that the timbers could be analysed and found to date from the 15th century. Now, elements like the lopsided brick wall and the windows are new replicas from the 20th century, but we can confidently say that this has substantial elements from the early 1400s, and it's still a private home today. So personally, if I was asked what is the oldest house in London, I would confidently state the Ancient House of Walthamstow. But as I said, these things are never clear cut, and so I want to throw two curveballs at you, which you're welcome to dismiss as just pedantry. Firstly, the Tower of London. Now, the oldest part of this castle complex is the White Tower in the centre, probably the oldest building that's still standing and in use in London, and it was built in the 11th century. Now, the tower is a large community, and ever since the days of it being a royal palace, it was home to hundreds of servants, of courtiers, of bodyguards, and that hasn't changed today. There are still people who live in the Tower of London, most famously the yeoman warders, who are known better perhaps by their nickname, the Beefeaters. And the oldest surviving accommodation of the Tower of London is Queen's House on Tower Green. Once one home, today it's split into 8 and was built around the mid-1500s, but number 6, according to Historic England, says it incorporates fabric from an earlier building from the 14th century. So it's still a home today. It was built or rebuilt in the 1500s, and it has parts from the 14th century. Could this be classed as London's oldest home? Now, I'll mention just one more building, purely for a bit of fun, really. Along the busy Lower Thames Street is an ugly office block, and inside it are the remains of a Roman bathhouse. Now, rather than a public bathhouse, it's thought that this was built as part of a private riverside townhouse, and the bathhouse dates from the 3rd century AD, and it's complete with Roman underfloor heating. So of course this is an ancient ruin, it is not lived in today, but in terms of the oldest part of a house in London, I thought it deserved a mention, and happily you can visit the Billingsgate bathhouse on tours today. So perhaps this is a little clearer than London's oldest pub. I think that Walthamstow's Ancient House, built in the 1430s, large elements of it still surviving and used as a private house, takes the crown. Of course, within the City of London, Cloth Fair numbers 41 to 42 can have that title as well. But I'd love to know what you think in the comments, and let me know if I've missed any old houses out as well. I'll see you next time for more of London's fun, unusual and hidden history.